Welcome to the Lead with Levity podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Heather Walker, and I'm very happy that you are joining me today. Because if you've ever been in a situation where you felt like I'm hitting a wall here, I'm doing the best that I can, I'm working really, really hard, but the obstacles seem insurmountable, and the obstacles are people that I actually thought I could count on, people I believed in. If that's you, then this episode is for you. I think you're going to get some love. You'll get some inspiration, maybe even the sense that, okay, I'm not in this alone today. So our conversation today is all about the fight that you don't see. And our guest is Dr. Wendy Davis. She actually has a PhD in political science. She ran for office in Utah, and she's going to share a little bit about what it was actually like on the campaign trail, what you don't know about what it's like for candidates on the campaign trail. And then we're also going to then transition into some of the fights that you don't see at work. And we get into some really authentic experiences. So I hope that you enjoy this episode. Don't forget to subscribe so that you know when new episodes come out.
It's time for a sneak peek. Sneak peek, sneak peek.
There's something so amazing and empowering knocking on somebody's door and saying, "Hi, my name is Wendy and I'm running to represent you in the state legislature. What's on your mind?" That's fun. And it was other noise of the campaign that became extremely oppressive and stressful, whether it was donors having expectations, always judging, are you doing enough, making judgments about the electability of you as a candidate or the closeness of your race with bad information. So that was a constant battle. And there were many times I was on the phone well into the night with candidates or other advisors, my campaign manager, just saying like, hey, how do we handle this situation? How do we manage? How do we counter this? That became a lot. And there were no days off. That was hard. And you power through it just like you do in work.
And now, on with the show.
When you're feeling the pressure, take a moment to step back, pick up your marbles, and choose to lead with levity. Join us on the Lead with Levity podcast for fireside chats that will fill your bucket and help you get back to being the leader you were meant to be. Now here's your host, Dr. Heather Walker.
Welcome back to the Lead with Levity podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Heather Walker, and I am so excited to share this next message with you, this next conversation. So on the line today is Dr. Wendy Davis. She's a former candidate for the Utah House of Representatives. She's also the author of The Fight You Don't See, which we'll be talking about a lot today. And she's the Chief Experience Officer for Agile Cloud Consulting. They help implement technology for nonprofit, getting them going. And she is also a grandma of 10 smart, talented, funny little people. And so she's bringing a lot of wonderful experiences to the table and to the conversation today. Wendy, how are you?
I am delighted to be here. Thank you so much for having me as a guest on your podcast. I appreciate it.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. And Wendy, I hear that you're based out of Utah. What is new in the world of Utah lately? Because I went there, oh my goodness, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, something like that. It's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
But I haven't been back since.
Well, I'll tell you what is brand new in Utah is that we have a new NHL team, which is just all the rage. We were able to acquire a National Hockey League team. It's a really big deal in Utah. We, of course, believe we have the greatest snow on earth. We're trying to get the Olympics. We should find out. Have the Olympics. So it's a beautiful day in Utah any day of the week. We love our outdoor activities, and we're just delighted to grow economically in Utah.
Nice. I've never been to a hockey game. A part of me feels like I would enjoy it a little bit too much with the fights and and all of that. But one day I hope to get out there and go to a hockey game. So if you're listening to this, people, send me some hockey tickets. I want to experience a hockey game. Wendy, I'm really excited to learn a little bit more about the book that you put out, The Fight That We Don't See. What have you experienced that has led you to say, you know what, this is something that others need to read about, they need to learn about, they need to know?
Yeah, well, thank you for the opportunity. I ran for the Utah State Legislature in 2020. And as soon as I started getting into this, I thought, oh goodness, there is a lot going on. And as a political science PhD, I know from my studies, there are not enough firsthand narratives written by candidates. And we hear big name memoirs out there, and those usually have political motivation behind them. A lot of times
Yeah.
who's going to run for office will write a big narrative, a political memoir. But just the nuts and bolts to give an insider's perspective of what it's like to run. And I started immediately hitting all kinds of interesting challenges. This isn't a book about open a bank account, get a loan. Like, it's not that kind of a book. It's a book
Mm-hmm.
that is really saying this was my experience as a female Democrat in Utah running for a very coveted seat in a flippable district and expecting just to be welcomed with open arms and supported, and what happened. So those
Mm.
power structures was something that I really wanted to pull out as a theme in my book.
Yes, yes. And we've had other sort of political candidates on this show as well. And from what I know, what I've heard is it is a stressful journey. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like for you?
It was very stressful. For me, it was interesting. This was something that I had wanted to do since the time I was very young. And I consider my book a political memoir. And so I weave these stories of political socialization from the time I'm a small child through high school, and all of these experiences that I had. So this was something that I had wanted to do for a very long time. So when I finally had organized my life in such a way that I could do this between my career and family and all of that, I was really surprised at how challenging and how stressful it was. And also, it was COVID. I did
Mm-hmm.
so, my plan was to knock on doors, and we did. We knocked thousands and thousands of doors. But
Wow.
the stress is that one of the reasons I called the book The Fight You Don't See is to expose it is mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, everything that you could imagine, it pulls on you. And the bits and bytes that we see on television of high profile political candidates, just imagine that times thousands of people running for county clerk and city council and all of
Mm.
these. My journey is not unique, but my journey is uniquely my own. And in the era of COVID, when things were stressful anyway, it was rough. I'm very clear in the book. I ended up getting a mental health professional to talk to every single week. And
Mm-hmm.
I had to process what was happening, all of these different layers of what was going on in the campaign. And a lot of it, you just deal with it. People are nasty on social media. People say mean things to your face. They say mean things in private. Family members that you thought were going to support you don't. People come out of, you're like, all I'm trying to do is support my community because I think I'd be really good at this. And I expect the types of challenges that will come at you. I think that was a great unknown and really kind of surprising.
Yeah. One thing that I've always wondered about with people who go into politics is it something that you're groomed for, where at some point someone is going to try and dig up dirt on me. So I have to be the best example of a human for the rest of my life. Did you have that kind of pressure as well?
So there are some people who are cultivated as candidates for sure. They're, pillars in their community. They're well known, and a lot of times there's a path to different offices. People will be encouraged to run for an office like a city council, and then maybe or a school board before they would try to foray into something like the state legislature. So there is some of that going on. Listen, when I decided to finally do this, I'm like, ooh. I've been very vocal on social media for way more than 10 years, and I'm happy to own whatever I've said. But I did go through it. I'm like, do I really mean that now? And you change. I mean, we grow and mature, and our thoughts change, and the way we see the world change. We should expect that. And
Mm.
there were a couple of things where I'm like, oh, maybe I should connect with that person and make sure that we were clear on that or some of that. But yeah, some of that does come back. And the interesting thing, I had someone say the biggest challenges won't be external. They'll come from
Hmm.
inside. And I thought, oh, that can't possibly happen. What do you mean?
Ah.
Right. The people that are closest to you and family or friends or former friends felt empowered to expose or think they're exposing things to other people. And I'm like, okay, well,
Wow.
yeah, that's
That's one way to say it. They felt empowered to expose my dirty laundry or anything that they thought others should know about me. Wow. So, we're going to get into the fight that you don't see at work, but I want to maybe land for a minute on the fight that you don't see internally, because this is something that many leaders face. We don't all have to go and run for office to experience some of these challenges, to have people in our lives that we thought we could count on, that we thought we could rely on, who would be on our side, turn on us or do things that they may believe is helpful, but it's actually not. It actually causes more harm than good. And in the midst of all of this, you still have a job to do. You're still out there shaking hands, kissing babies, traveling all around to make sure that your face is out there, the message is out there. You still have a business to run on top of this. How did you mentioned getting help from a mental health professional. What strategies helped you sort of make it through all of that stress and pressure?
It's a really great question. So at the time, I was working at a local university and we had gone 100% remote, I think on Friday, March 13th. And
Mm.
that was right. It was also happened to be the same day that I went down to the county clerk and declared my candidacy. So I was 100% remote. I was able to compartmentalize and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
9 to 5, this is my job. And that's all I focus on is my job. And then
Mm-hmm.
I would take a small nap and then I would go knock doors. And I was able to compartmentalize. And then after knocking doors, when the sun was no longer out, I would come home and I would really toggle every other night. One night was like a work night, the next night was a campaign night, and I just kind of made that decision in my head, and I would compartmentalize those things. And I think I was able to do that because of the remote nature and being in COVID. But that's really what I had to do because if not, either your job or this activity can become all consuming. And it was important to me to separate them. I didn't speak about the campaign in the context of my daily work. I'm like, it's not really relevant.
Mm.
What I do on my personal time and has nothing to do with work. My work did have something to do with my campaign because I'm able to say, look, I have this job. I'm just an average everyday person. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a landowner. I'm not independently wealthy. I'm just like you. That's how my
Mm-hmm.
job had relevance. So my team that reported to me at the time, they knew I was doing it, but I just kept it separate, if that makes any sense. And that was another way that I could cope is just keeping those things really separate.
Mm. So you were kind of like Batman.
Yeah,
Have you ever thought of yourself as Batman?
no, no, I have not.
So you had this going on during the daytime. At nighttime, you were working either. So you were working during the daytime and working at nighttime. Compartmentalizing. Did that start to break down at any point and really wear at you, where you said, "I can't do this anymore"?
Mostly with campaign things as campaign things got stressful. And I loved talking to the voters. That was the least stressful part of my campaign. There's something so amazing and empowering knocking on somebody's door and saying, hi, my name is Wendy, and I'm running to represent you in the state legislature. What's on your mind? That's fun. And it was
Mm-hmm.
other noise of the campaign that became extremely oppressive and stressful, whether it was donors having expectations, always judging, are you doing enough? Making judgments about the electability of you as a candidate or the closeness of your race with bad information. So that was a constant battle. And there were many times I was on the phone well into the night with candidates or other advisors, my campaign manager, just saying like, hey, how do we handle this situation? How do we manage? How do we counter this? That became a lot. And there were no days off. That was hard. And you power through it just like you do in work. Like if you've got a big project and you're like, listen, I don't want to work a weekend, but every once in a while you got to do what you got to do because you got to get this done.
Right.
It just can't become normal. And the campaign was going to end. It has a distinct end date. So it's like we're just rushing to November 3rd. And if we could just get like counting down the days and backing it in, and you knew it was going to end, which is very different than a job. Because if jobs
Mm.
get really stressful, you're like, all right, I'm going to do this weekend thing, but is this ever going to end? Like, am I creating a precedent? With a campaign, it's going to end. So you leave a body mark in the wall, you hit that wall, and you're like, all right, I did everything I could do. And then
Mm-hmm.
on election day, there's literally nothing for a candidate to do but wait. You're done. Right. So that's the difference
Yeah.
I think, between a campaign, which has a distinct beginning, a middle, and an end, and a job, profession, career, which is obviously very long term.
So for you, one thing that helped you survive it was knowing that there would be an end. There's a light at the end of the tunnel at some point. And when you wrote the book, obviously you wrote it to bring light to the experiences that some people might have when they're on the trail. But I'm also wondering, what are we to do with this information? To understand that, people who are running for office are human too. Is there a reform needed in the process? What do we do with this information, Wendy, now that we know?
Yeah. One of the reasons I wrote the book is I want people to know that it's going to be hard. And thankfully I didn't know going in how the challenges that it would be. It's a lot like parents.
Mm,
If you've ever had a new child and you're like, okay, okay, well that happened. I have no idea how to deal with that. I'm going to manage that. I'm going to move on, right? Like
mm-hmm.
you kind of do it as you go.
You make room.
Yes, and
Yes.
just you don't know what's going to happen. The kid fell off the stairs and bonked their head, and you've got to get stitches. Never had that happen before. Okay, so we manage that. We move on. So demystifying what it's like to run for office and saying it's going to be hard. Your version of hard is going to be very different than mine, but just know that going in and just kind of roll with the punches. But this is still something that people should do. It's worth the fight. And that the book ends on a very hopeful note, despite some pretty cruddy things that happened to me, including getting gerrymandered out of my district. I now live 1.3 blocks away, so I can never run against that person again. I lost like 78 votes. I had the closest race in all of Utah. I was winning on election night by almost 1,000 votes. Like I was
Wow.
shocked. And then through the mail-in ballots came in and my lead eroded. I held the lead for 10 days. And so when that happened, I'm like, all right, I'll take him on again next cycle. And then redistricting happened, and I was strategically redistricted where I no longer can run against him. And that's the fight you don't see. I kept fighting the gerrymandering, fighting the injustice of this. And what I want people to know is like, I don't regret the fight. It was the single most important growth opportunity that I've had in a couple of decades. I so much as a person, and it's worth it. The principles that I believe in, what I was trying to advance for the voters in my neighborhood, those are still there. They haven't gone away. A lot of people quit. It's just too much. You want to disengage. You gave it your all and that didn't work out and the systems are stacked against you and it's easier to tap out and say I'm done. So I sat on this for a couple of years. Like who's going to care about my story? I'm a woman who lost an election. Who's going to care? And I'm like, it's still important. And interesting, after the book was released, I knew that I was doing okay when a Republican senator and state senator in Utah tweeted something really nasty. Like, she's literally a nobody who cares. I'm like, well, obviously you care enough to tweet about it. But
I
I expected
know.
that. I expected because that's a patriarchal power structure. And for him to say, to try and marginalize me and say, what happened to you doesn't matter. Who cares? Nobody even knows who you are. You think I didn't
Mm,
struggle with that? You think I didn't for 2 years think, am I worthy enough to tell my story? Every
mm,
story is worth it. And the fact that
yes.
that guy's going to send a mean tweet, I didn't have to say a thing. People just piled it on on him,
Wow.
piled it on.
S- So, Wendy, I think that is a really good segue into the workplace because oftentimes we go into work with, ready to go. Like, I've got this team that I'm working with, I've got a project that I'm excited about, I have a deadline, I have a target to hit, let's go. And then you run into these situations, and we talk about the fight that you don't see. You run into these situations at work where other people are creating situations where it makes it harder to do your job, harder to get things done. And I want to talk about that. What are some of the fights at work that we don't see? So what have you noticed?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of different fights that you don't see. And I feel like I experienced the worst of this early in my career when I was much younger, when I would say, if I'm reflective, where my emotional intelligence wasn't as developed as it is now. And just the idea, I worked for a company for 15 years in the same role, and I was really good at it. But I realized I'm never going to move up. I mean, I kept moving
Mm,
salary and position, but I was important to this business in one specific way.
ah,
But it wasn't a way that was giving me joy after a while. And the more that I would want to change that, the more I felt like, well, we need you here. Right.
mm,
And so having to break out of that, I think that a lot of people experience that in the workplace. And so I now, as a leader in my company, it's important to me to try and build the company that I wish that I'd always had, and put people first and ask people constantly, what are your career goals? Where do you want to be? And can we create a path? Oh, you want to be an architect? You want to be a data architect? Okay, well, you're here now. Here's this path for you to do this.
mm-hmm,
And not once you want people to have the skills that you need in your company, but you also, people are going to be much more happy and satisfied if they feel like their interests are being met as well. And I don't know that a lot of companies do that really, really well. So those are some of the fights that you don't see. But also we mentioned power structures in politics. I think those happen in companies too, intentionally and unintentionally. A couple of principles that I try to live by at work that I think really help me. And these have come after decades. It's not anything I just figured out. It took me a long time to get here. But
mm-hmm.
if I can assume the best intentions in people and lead with that, it changes the whole narrative. The stories that you make up in your head when you don't know what's really going on are far worse than anything that's really happening.
Typically, yes.
Yeah, so just try to say, like, all right, I assume that person has the best of intentions. Learning to check my ego, especially when I was a young consultant, a young tech consultant, I thought I was all that in a bucket of nails, right? And I was doing really well, but I didn't feel like I had leaders who helped me check my ego.
I want to unpack all of this. I really do. I want to make sure that I'm hearing some of the big top buckets so that we can go back and unpack. We've got career pathing and planning and making sure that you can go where you need to go and grow into the person that you could be. We have assuming best intent and checking your ego. And I want to ask you about that. And I'm trying to decide, should we unpack it now or should we maybe, can you tell me about some of the other fights that we don't see? And then we'll unpack.
Yeah, I mean, a couple other fights that we don't see, and this one is tough, and I'm just going to tackle it head on
Okay.
because I'm passionate about it. And I'm just going to say it. I
Yes.
think we have great pay inequity between men and women in the workforce, and this is quantifiable. It is not just my opinion. And I have to tell you, I have been so frustrated in an era when we have these amazing now WNBA players, and Caitlin Clark is, she's gotten all the attention. Her team didn't win the national championship. Let's remember that, but she's still been an amazing force for good in that sport. And all of the news stories about the pay inequity between a rookie
Hmm.
NBA player and a WNBA player. And the mansplaining that has gone on social media when I engage in this topic is gross, and it's just indicative of a much bigger problem in this country, which is there is pay inequity. And the problem is that salaries are private. They're not public. It's also this taboo that you're never supposed to talk about, right? So how do you know if you're an employee that the pay is inequitable? So as a leader, that's something that's really important to me, that I feel like I'm always advocating for on our leadership team. Like, we need to make sure that we are equitable in our hiring practices and that we are equitable in our pay and promotion, especially not just the male female divide, but among all of the diverse qualities of our employee base. And I really think that's a big fight we don't see. In Utah, we have hit the bottom of the barrel. We're in 100th place of all the states multiple years, and every time that report comes out, the number of male lawmakers who just are like, oh no, that's inaccurate data. It's because there's not a lot of women in the workforce because they don't want
Mm.
the workforce. And like, just this explaining that I hear around that is so frustrating. And if things like our new WNBA players who are amazing shine a different light on this, and we talk about it through the lens of athletics, and that helps us amplify that in other areas of business, let that be the catalyst that where we finally talk about this more openly. I mean, people like you and me know this and we're talking about it all the time, but I feel like a more general population has become aware of it. So that's a
Yeah.
big one. I know I kind of dumped the big fight you don't see at work.
The big fight you don't see. All right. Any other fights that you don't see?
So many, but though there's some big ones in there.
Yes. The career planning one is an interesting fight. One thing that I've noticed, I always get excited when I see companies that have rotation programs where there are opportunities for you somewhere in this company. And if this isn't working out here, let's talk about another position that might benefit from the skills that you bring to the table. Because there's so many other companies out there that where you're right, you have to wait for someone to retire, quit. You have to really be in it for the long haul before you even get that next bump up. And so what I've seen, especially in the IT world, you've probably seen this as well, is that if you want a promotion, you have to give yourself a promotion. And typically it's you have to leave your company and go somewhere else. And maybe you come back at a higher position, but that's typically the route that I see for people who want to go higher faster is leave and get another position somewhere else because a prophet is not honored in their own land. And then you can come back. But Wendy, what have you seen?
I absolutely have seen that. And it's extremely frustrating. When I was a manager a couple of jobs ago, I had an employee who had been there for more than a decade and felt that, and he called people out on that and said, do I have to leave to get more pay and more recognition? And so I as her manager, was able to work through that. But it's very, very common
Mm-hmm.
to do that. And
Yeah.
here's the thing. I've found that also, this might bother some people, but those are systems of oppression. And the time you and I are talking this week, the FTC just had a ruling that non-competes in this country are no longer valid. That will be challenged in
Hmm.
courts of law. But millions of people, I can only speak to my sector, sign non-compete. So when I
Mm-hmm.
played, not at my company, but you sign a non-compete that says, in the event that I leave, I am not allowed to go to a competitor or anybody like me for the period of 2 years. So you gain all these skills and knowledge and you want to leave, right? Because you said that's your pathway out. But now I can't go and share my skills and knowledge and get better pay and get a promotion and perhaps get more recognition because now you've handcuffed me to this non-compete.
Right. And in all fairness, I'm going to put on devil's advocate hat right now. The company is investing quite a bit in those individuals. And for them to get the certifications, the education, all of that stuff paid for, and then just leave and go take that to the competitor, take the processes that they've learned about, the secrets, the confidential information that they've learned about to the competitor. Oh, that's not okay either. So, there
I see that point.
it's tricky.
I think that but it's a contract, but it's also it puts that inequitable power, right? Still
It
in the
does.
employer and gives the employee very little choice. So there are ways I think that you could work together on that. So you have like within 3 years, I was able to benefit from tuition reimbursement in
Mm.
part of my career. And I signed a paper that said if you leave within 5 years, you need to return that tuition. And so
Oh,
I
wow.
do that as a term of condition. Like if you decide to leave within, X amount of time, the amount we're going to track the amount of your certificate,
Mm-hmm.
what that is, and we will withhold that from like there's other ways to do that. Like, okay,
That's
yeah,
true.
but and also protecting intellectual property is different, and there are ways to do that without saying you can't leave or you can leave only work.
Right.
I would
Because the last thing that you want is people sabotaging your company because they're upset and frustrated. They feel like they can't go anywhere else.
Yes, absolutely. But
Yeah,
as an employer, you also want to make it a place that people have progression and have opportunity, right? Like just exactly what we're talking about.
exactly.
They don't see a path forward, and you've given them no other way except to seek outside employment in order to grow themselves for their personal edification, for their family, for their personal economics. We're now still at an inequitable power structure, right? So I think
Mm.
this is going to force a conversation. And I've signed these non-competes my whole career. I've signed them. And they're not often challenged, but sometimes they are. I have friends who went to a competitor and the company that we worked for sued the competitor.
Wow.
And the competitor happened to be a very large company. And
Mm-hmm.
said, don't worry, we've got you. We'll get around the non-compete. We will move you to a different sector. Like you will no longer be in the nonprofit sector. We'll put you in public sector or we'll put you in
Wow.
government or something like that. And so there are ways around them. But can you imagine you just take your new dream job and you find out that you are personally being sued and so is your company because you were
It's
no longer
scary.
satisfied here and you've got X number of years experience, you want to grow your career and now you're sued? Like we need to have this conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. It's people don't always realize how serious those papers are. We get them and we sign them and we keep it moving, which I think is a good segue into this conversation about egos. Yes, yes. So you mentioned early in your career you were kind of going about your daily work and there was a lot that you needed to learn. So let's talk about the fight that we don't see when it comes to that. What did you notice? Because I know when I first started and I was an individual contributor, I was really good at getting things done quickly to the point where they thought, oh, I'm going to give Heather this assignment. She's going to get it done in 3 months. And next week, I'm like, I did it. What's next? And by the way, can you hurry up and get me some feedback on that? What are you doing, manager? And I needed to check my own ego because I didn't realize just how much was on my manager's plate and the people that I was working with, how much was on their plates. I had maybe one thing to focus on, two things to focus on. And now that I'm in a position of leadership, I can see it. I can see all the pressure and everything that I wasn't able to see before. And that gives me a little bit more grace and empathy for other leaders. What did it look like for you?
Well, I appreciate you saying that. And as a leader myself, I have deep regrets about like what I used to think about my former managers, right? What are they doing?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you just have no idea. So I was a young consultant when I first started in technology consulting. I was in my late 20s and I was in sales and I was
Mm,
responsible for configuring software in order to demonstrate it and demonstrate that it could work for a particular customer. And it was really high stakes and really hard work and a lot of
mm,
travel, presentation, the ability to be an effective speaker, persuasive, highly compensated, high risk, high reward. And I'm like, yeah, I'm the one who got this deal in. Like, look at how great I am. And just neglecting to see, like, no, there was a sales team. There was the person who wrote the proposal. There were, I don't know, 7 other people on your team who helped you. There were
mm,
your managers who were supporting you, but just feeling so confident in my skills and abilities and the small part that I played on that. And also being in a culture at that time, which unfortunately kind of encouraged that somewhat inner team competitive behavior in order to drive performance. So I thought that that was really unhealthy. And it took me a while to figure out like you're not leading this. You are an individual contributor. I was a good team player, but it was the ego still. The
mm,
skill was fine, but the ego was not there. And I I didn't even know that that's what was going on. And it would come to me in different ways in performance reviews. Like
mm,
you sometimes you say a lot of things and I just don't think someone knew to say, I think your ego is the problem and let's talk about what that means. So I would get feedback and constructive feedback, but it never really being able to help me identify the causal mechanism of it. And it took me a long time to say, oh, it's my ego. If you can set that aside, you're still going to be this great contributor, but just life is going to be so much better. And you're going to understand how to
mm.
fit into this bigger picture.
So, what I'm hearing is the feedback that you received wasn't clear enough for you to really even see that this is a serious thing that I need to figure out how to fix. Like, if the feedback is, oh, you say a lot of things, it's like,
Or you have,
what does that mean? Are you saying that my communication isn't clear? Are you saying that I am giving you too much context? Are you saying that it doesn't make any sense at all? Like, what are you saying? What does that mean? So maybe we can help people who are in this position who don't know that they're in this position. What are some signs? Do you remember Jeff Foxworthy? You might be a redneck if.
yeah.
What are some signs that your ego might be in the way? Like your ego might be in the way if.
Yeah, some signs for me looking back on like 20 some 30-year-old some Wendy were that I thought that I knew it all and I knew what I knew really well and that was okay. And so I felt
Mhm.
I was pretty vocal and I wasn't always right. And I think I needed people to say, you know what, I hear you, but your perspective isn't always right. And let me share
Mhm.
with you a different perspective. And that was some of it. It was a lot of tone. And people would say that, like, it's your tone. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. And
Mhm.
and I think I felt entitled to be aggressive with my opinions because I knew I was a high performer and I knew I could get away with it. And it wasn't that my comments weren't important. I just needed to figure out everybody else's comments are equally important. And that's the ego, right? That's the
Yes,
ego.
yes.
And this is very self-reflective, right? If
It's
my
good.
colleagues ever hear this, they'll be like, "Oh, you're being way too hard on yourself." But that's how I see it now, all these years later. It was just realizing that, yeah, you are good at what you do, but there are other people who are good too. And can you be happy for them? And can you help them? Right? Can you not just
Yes.
elevate your objectives and paths in this way and think that that you are in some way better than or what have you. And I think as a manager or a people leader, to try and get to like what motivates that person, what is motivating them to do that? Are they having but that's why I was talking about emotional intelligence. It took me a while to develop. No one ever talked about emotional intelligence. Are you
Mm-hmm.
self-aware? Are you aware that you're doing this, Wendy? Are you aware the impact that has on you, your reputation, and on us? And I think we talk more about emotional intelligence than we ever have before. And I genuinely feel like people were trying to chalk all around that without necessarily knowing the right words to use. Like, are you managing yourself? Are you self-aware? Do you have social awareness? Are these the types of relationships that you want to build? Are you effectively building relationships with your team members? Or are you just advancing your knowledge because you think you're an expert and just dropping it there? And that's
Mm-hmm.
intelligence. I think if I could have figured out how to develop that sooner, it would have been really helpful.
I don't know if you are able to do this on the spot right now, but I think it would be incredibly helpful if help us help others who are in a situation like this. Can you remember a moment when your eyes were open to, oh, I get it. Oh, I didn't realize I wasn't making space for other perspectives. Oh, someone said something very specific to me and it made me realize that there's another way to go about this. Because that's something that I work with people, and oftentimes the people who want to give feedback are afraid of giving that feedback, and they're not sure what to say or how to say it in a way that's actually going to resonate with the person who needs to hear it. So it's very rare that we get to have this conversation with the other side of the table. So I'm excited. I'm like over here going, ooh, I'm taking notes. Yeah. Were there any specific moments of absolute clarity where you just said, wow, I didn't get it before, but now I do?
I had some moments that were really hard, and it took some time for me to realize like why that happened. And there was a time in my company where we had merged with a competitor. And that's a lot.
Yes.
Can you imagine? Every day you go out and you convince people why this competitor is inferior to you, and suddenly they're on your team.
Oh, no.
There's a lot of ego. It happens a lot in technology
Mm-hmm.
after mergers and acquisitions. And there was a lot of ego that I had, and I knew what I knew, but I didn't have the emotional intelligence to understand that there was a time and a place to assert your opinions and your knowledge. And in a meeting of these new team members, I made a comment about the inferiority of our product, or the superior nature of our product, right?
Mm-hmm.
That I know you think that your product does X, Y, and Z, but let me tell you why our customers want this product.
Mm.
That did not sit well with the people I said that to. And
Yeah.
instead of confronting that directly, there was a concerted and coordinated effort to get me fired.
Hmm.
And this is like,
I could see that. Yeah, like we're afraid of her. So instead, we're going to anonymously tip off HR and her manager and everyone else instead of actually saying, hey, I didn't like what you said in that meeting.
yes. And it was never said to me directly. And there were campaigns to document other things that I had said or things that I had written. And the truth was, it wasn't that I was necessarily wrong. It just wasn't the right way to say it. There was a way for obviously both of these products to work together, for these teams to work together. I had felt threatened, and they were like, we're coming in, we're going to do this. And when it all happened, the fight was my manager fighting for me, saying, this isn't quantifiable. Like, it's really all subjective. And when it was all done, my manager, who's still a dear friend of mine, called me and said, you need to know this happened. I got it shut down. And it was bad on their part. Like they shouldn't have tried to organize this campaign and engage people, but it happened. And I was devastated.
And you need to be aware that,
And you need to be aware of what happened. I was crushed
yes.
because I had no idea, because I'd always felt safe in the company. And I felt like, yeah, I was kind of feisty. I was young and feisty and full of good ideas and full of good opinions. And I felt like that for the most part, people were like, bring it on. Like, yeah, we know that's part of your personality, but it didn't fly. And I was crushed. And that was the first time I felt there's a group that has power that I don't see, that now I have to be much more aware of. And
Yeah.
I shouldn't have said it that way. It just never occurred to me to behave differently, that I should have behaved different. But that's all part of that emotional intelligence. But I was literally, I was crushed, devastated, like tears. My reputation was impugned. I mean, it had gone up to the highest levels of that company and up to the highest levels and sources. And they're like, we know you don't like what she said, but it's not a termination event. Like, you're going to have to figure out a way to work together. And so that was really, really, really hard. And even then, I feel like I'm not blaming anybody but myself. I said what I said. I was young. Doesn't None of that excuses this. This is like 15, 20 years ago kind of a thing.
It happened.
It happened.
Yeah.
It happened. And then what can I learn from that? Right.
Exactly.
What can I learn from that? So yeah, we went deep. Like, I'm telling you, like, all my stuff.
Well, yeah, that's my gift. I think but it's important because there are so many people out there on one side who say, this is me, take it or leave it. I stand up for myself. And then on the other side, I don't know how to talk to that person. They scare me, or they'll say things like, oh, well, that's just them. There's nothing I can do. And there's sort of a learned helplessness. So on both sides, they're not coming together. They're not seeing eye to eye. And that's a shame, because at the end of the day, you're on the same team and the team is impaired because of this lack of understanding of what is the best way to work with one another. So I agree with you that that's a huge, huge fight that we don't always see, that causes a lot of pain within organizations on both sides. Because on one side, you have an individual who's doing really great work, who is one insight away from shifting how they approach others. And then on the other side, you have others who are saying, I want it to work. Can't we all just get along? How can we make this happen? So Wendy, this was so insightful, and I'm so glad that you shared your story with us. And because this is the Lead with Levity podcast, and we're actually almost out of time today, I want to ask you one thing, because I don't want to leave it on a low note. I want to leave it on a high note. What do you do to have fun, to restore your energy and really get out from under all of that pressure that you face every single day?
Yeah, I love to hike in Utah mountains. That's my sanctuary. I love that. I love to travel. Big places and little places. Some of the most joyous times that I have are when some of my grandkids come over and they ride bikes and play wiffle ball in the front yard and throw the football around. And I'm, no offense, to people who love this, I'm not a Disneyland person. Like, that doesn't bring me. I'd rather hike in a mountain or go to a national park or go down to the lake to fish and just have that experience with people, because it's those experiences that matter. There's nothing that I love more than getting together with old friends or family and like just hanging out, and the next thing, like, you're laughing so hard that you're crying. Those are the things that you remember the most, but you got to make time for that, right?
Yes.
I'm a high performer. It's like, all right, I'm going to plan to go to dinner with this person. I'm going to plan to go see my cousin and his family and say hello and create an opportunity, not saying like, we're going to we're going to laugh till we cry tonight. It's like, no, just create an
Yeah.
opportunity to be together. And
Yeah.
that's what brings me the most joy, is those kind of experiences.
Yes, yes. And making time for that to happen, because it's not going to happen on its own, y'all.
Well, you got to prioritize.
Not at all. So, Dr. Davis, thank you so much for joining us today. Is there anything that you want to leave our listeners with?
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I want to leave you with one image, and it's the image that I write in the last chapter of my book about a metaphor about opening doors. And when I've had an experience, or we've had an experience, there's a metaphor that I have of like opening the Capitol door, a heavy,
Mm,
and I feel like I have pulled those heavy doors open my whole life. And if I or you or anybody can be that person now that holds that door open for someone else and says,
mm.
here's the way, and I'm here to help you, and I'm going to hold this door for you. That's what I would leave people with. What is the metaphorical door that you can hold open for someone else, right? How can
Yes.
you do that now with all this wealth of knowledge that we've gained throughout our careers, and knowing what we know? If I can, like, I can make it a little bit easier for you and you don't have to experience what I experienced, then I'm going to hold that door open for you. That's what I would.
Exactly. Exactly. Oh, this is so good. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope that if you run again, I hope you win next time.
Get that.
Yes.
Thanks for tuning in to the Lead with Levity podcast. To get resources mentioned in this episode and find out what we're all about, check us out at leadwithlevity.com.